Spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of art. It's the Tenet Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson, coming to you from the 40 West Arts District here in Lakewood, Colorado. And joining me from the Road of Enchantment, deep in his bunker d'arte, you know him as quite possibly the most interesting man in the world, my Artner and friend, Wes Brown.
Hey, Todd. Oh, my God, it's another week. Hey, did you hear about Beatrice Flamini? She just emerged from 250 feet below the surface in a cave in Spain after 500 days. Can you believe that? She had no contact with outside people. They would bring in food and they would leave her alone.
Was this like performance art or something?
I don't know if it's she's a mountaineering athlete, but she decided to go underground in 2021 and emerge in 2023. 500 days below the surface. Amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing. And actually, there was a point this week, because you know how you have those weeks where things just aren't flowing. I would have gladly joined her in her hole in the ground. I think if they re-elect Trump, I'm going to go for 4 years underground. That's 4 years underground.
Yep,
all right.
Yep. That's going to be.
You want to go together?
We should. We could do the podcast from 250 feet below the surface.
We'd be like two little hobbits.
And they were connected to her via a Wi-Fi thing. So, you know, they were kind of, I don't know how they were observing, but it was an article that I read. And so how she spent her time is she read books and she liked to knit. So there we go. So knitting is great for the psyche if you're 250 feet underground, or maybe live in Trinidad, Colorado.
If that's the case, I think we might know somebody that could teach us how to knit.
That's right. I need to get in that kind of Zen mode anyway. My brain is too hectic. I need to have somebody teach me knitting just to calm the hell down.
Yeah, I'm down for it, man. You know what set me on the right path, though?
What's that?
Last night, I sat down. I was like not in a good headspace, but what makes me really happy is Ted Lasso. Have you watched Ted Lasso?
I've not watched that yet. No.
Oh my God.
I'm a big soccer fan, but that's pretty good, huh?
Yeah, it doesn't even matter if you like soccer or not, but Ted Lasso is so well written. The characters are so good, and it just makes me happy. It just gives me joy to no end. So you have to watch Ted Lasso.
It's on my list.
On my list. Do it, man.
Hey, let's talk some art.
Let's do it. Thank you for joining us. Remember, you can always find out what we're up to via our social media on Instagram at Tenet Podcast, our Tenet Podcast Facebook page, and of course, our website, tenetpodcast.com. All right. You feel warmed up?
I am warmed up. I've been exercising all morning just for this moment.
All right. Good to know. You know where we're headed this week? I think you alluded to it already.
Yeah, Trinidad, Colorado.
Trinidad, Colorado. You know anything about Trinidad?
Just that I've driven by. I've actually spent a day there once, and then I drive by it when I go to Mesa, Arizona. That's about the extent of it.
I think that happens a lot with Trinidad, which is, I think, unfortunate. Yeah, but I'm excited to go explore it here in the very near future. And there's some famous things and people that have come through Trinidad. Did you know that?
Yeah.
The first woman sports writer.
Really?
Was lived in Trinidad.
Didn't know that.
Yep. She covered the 1908 World Series. She was the only woman. Can you imagine? In 1908 being the only woman sports writer.
Wow.
And then Bat Masterson. Being a history buff.
Lawman, gunman.
Yeah. Marshall.
Criminal, maybe.
Yeah. Yep. So cool stuff. And we're going to journey down there today. We're going to have a couple guests.
And a puppy.
We're extremely excited to talk with our next guest. That's plural. That's right. 2 for the price of 1 this week on Tenet. They are Artners doing important work and engaging their community and beyond on multiple levels. And man, wait till you hear what they have cooking down in Trinidad. You can follow them on Instagram at wove.world. Welcome to the program, Emilie Odeile and Ken Chapin. How are you guys doing?
Thank you. Great. Thank you for having us.
It's great to have you on. I'm excited. This is going to be a fun conversation. What was you going to say, Todd? I'm sorry, I kind of cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to say exactly what you took the words right out of my mouth, man.
Nice.
I want to start today because I want to give our listeners some context before we get to the main reason that we asked to have you on. So I'd like to start off by having each one of you tell us a little bit about yourselves, a little bit of background. So Emilie, ladies before gentlemen, let's start with you.
Yeah. How far back do you want to go?
The beginning.
Well, yeah, the very beginning.
Conception.
So
Inception.
Alta Bates Hospital, Berkeley, California.
But you're
I
originally
believe
from
it's
California?
actually possible that you might be able to still see my birth on slides, which was shown to people for many years at Alta Bates Hospital in Berkeley, California.
Nice. Hey, a fellow Californian. I was born at the Naval Hospital in Camp Pendleton, California.
Oh,
So,
excellent.
yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. So I was born and raised in Berkeley, California, in the Bay Area. At a really early age, I became quite obsessed with musical theater and thought that that was going to be my future. At 15, I announced to my family, much to their dismay, that I would not be going to college, that instead I would be graduating high school early and moving to the bright lights of Broadway, which I did end up doing a week after I turned 18. I spent a couple of years there attempting to be a triple threat, but alas, I don't think I was actually good enough to do it. And found my way 2 years later in Hollywood, California. And I ended up working in the entertainment industry. I spent about a year as an extra until I got into the Screen Actors Guild, at which point I switched over to being a stand-in and photo double for many years. And it was actually on set that I started knitting, because I would find myself on set for, 12, 13, 14, 15-hour days. And I needed something to do. So I started knitting, and I sort of became known on those sets, especially the ones that I worked on for long periods of time, as the knitter. At the time, knitting was not super duper popular. It was right about to boom. And, within a few years, you'd find, rows and rows of extras in hallways in between scenes, knitting in the hallways. But it was not yet the case. And it was pretty novel to see, particularly a young lady sitting and knitting on set. So yeah, I got really quite obsessed with it. A little bit like, when you're a little kid and you're reading and your parents want you to go to bed and you say one more chapter, one more page. I started doing that with myself at night, one more row. And I'd find myself awake at 2 a.m, just knitting and knitting. And it was on those sets that people started asking me to make them things. And I started just figuring out how to make different things through experimentation. I think that if the internet had been then what it is now, I likely would have learned things quicker and likely would have, learned how to read a pattern, which I never really learned how to do because I was just by myself in the corners on sets figuring it out. But it ultimately worked to my advantage to just sort of figure things out by doing them. And to not be beholden to other people's patterns, which sometimes have typos in them, I discovered. So yeah, I started making a lot of custom things for people. And I remember getting to the point where I thought that I might want to make this a career. And I was sitting on the set of, what was it? Lemony Snicket, A Series of Unfortunate Events. And I was a stand-in and photo double on that movie and always knitting, which by the by, actually, I got to knit next to Meryl Streep on that movie where she was knitting a diagonal scarf, I remember. And I was knitting, I think, a really obnoxious, fuzzy bikini which I had a very bad habit of doing in those early days, of using those god awful yarns for really ridiculous pieces. So anyhow, it was while I was making that I was speaking to another stand-in on set, and I said, I'm thinking about quitting all of this. I'm kind of tired of it. I've been doing it for years. I really want to focus on my knitting and maybe even possibly make a career out of it. And she said, don't do it. Just don't do it. You love it. You have a passion for this. Keep it as your hobby. You will grow to hate it if you make it your career. And she definitely had a point, but her incredibly strong no really inspired my incredibly strong yes. I think it was helpful, actually, that she tried to deter me in that moment, because it made me realize how much I really wanted to do it. And I did, sometime probably in the next year, pretty much pull out of working in the industry in that capacity, and committed to figuring out a way to knit as a career. And during that time, I happened to have met another designer who was, a few steps ahead of me in the game. He was not a knitter. He was like a fashion designer, costume designer. And we spent a lot of time together, and I was constantly knitting. And he had just opened up a boutique in Hollywood, and he, at the end of the night, would see what I was knitting. And as soon as I was, done casting off, he would say, "Hey, can I just grab that and put it in the shop?" I was like, "Sure, yeah, go for it." And so, every few days he would just grab something from me and put it in his shop. And that was another, it was sort of one of those things that inspired me to keep going, because it likely wouldn't have occurred to me to go that fashion route. I was never particularly fashion oriented, but that's what he was doing. And some of my pieces started to sell, and I started to work with him. And after a few years of working with him on mostly his stuff, I decided it was really time for me to do my own thing. And I had absolutely no business doing this. I had no money. I was having trouble even making rent on my apartment. But something told me that it was time. And I went to his then landlord at the boutique and said, "Hey, do you have any spaces available?" And what I really wanted was to be right next to my friend on that street. And there wasn't anything available, but he said, "Across the way, just about a block away, I've got a space for you." And it seemed so far away, but I went and I looked at it. I walked through with the manager. There was a loft upstairs and a stairway leading to it. And as I entered this stairway, this sounds a little silly. I'm not super woo, but I do pay attention to my intuition when it comes in strong. And as I was walking up the stairwell, my body sort of got this buzzy feeling. And I heard a voice in my head saying, "This is my stairwell." And I went to the landlord. He gave me the price. I lied through my teeth because I couldn't afford anything. And I said to him, "Well, it's a little on the pricey side. If you dropped it by $500, I wouldn't have a problem at all whatsoever paying this." And kind soul that he was, not only did he drop the price by $500, but he said to me, "Listen, I'm going to write you a contract that says that you can opt out of this at any time you want, but I can't kick you out." And, that was another green light in my life that I was so incredibly grateful for. And I had about enough money saved up for 3 months to be able to do this. And I thought, for sure, I'm going to fail. There's just no possible way I'm going to be able to make this happen. But I decided that would be worth it. It would be worth betting on myself. It would be worth just trying it. And it would be worth public failure. I was terrified of of being publicly humiliated in my public failure. And I decided that that would be good for my soul if that happened. And I could just get over some stuff if that were to happen. And so I went ahead and I signed the lease while having scarlet fever, in fact, quite literally. And
did the crying happen before all this happened, or during, after you signed the?
I cried for 3 days straight. Literally for 3 days straight, I cried trying to make this decision because it seemed like such a crazy thing. But very possibly the scarlet fever had something to do with that. But yeah, as soon as I signed it, I was like, committed. I was ready to go. And I just worked my butt off from that moment. And it wasn't until I had been in the shop for 6 months that it dawned on me that I had surpassed those 3 months. And I thought that's success right there. I've done it twice as long as I anticipated doing it. And by that point, I was, there were ups and downs, and it wasn't always easy. It was a really challenging business to have, but I was doing it. I was getting jobs. In fact, before I even opened the doors, and I had made really one piece. It was before I had even opened the shop. I had made this one piece, and these designers saw it, and they were heading a few months later to Paris Fashion Week to show their line. And they said, "We have some knitwear that we want made. Can you make it?" And I thought, that's nuts to ask me to do that. I don't know what I'm doing at all. And I went across the street to Marco, the designer who I had just come from, Marco Moranti, but his line is called Marco. He's been my friend and really mentor for probably 20 years now. I went over there really looking for some relief. I thought for sure he would tell me, "Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's crazy for them to ask you to do that. You're not ready. You should say no." And instead, he said, "So what? Do it anyway. You'll figure it out." And I was so mad at him for telling me to do it. And I slunk back over to my studio and I figured it out. And a few weeks later, some of my pieces, there they were walking down Paris Fashion Week. I had a lot of sort of lucky moments like that. I ended up doing a lot of work for commercials and television, and a lot of custom work for private clients. And I also had a shop in, a boutique in the front where people were able to come in and purchase things from me. But the bulk of my business really was custom and entertainment industry clients. And I did that for about 5.5 years. Until I had my 5-year anniversary party. It was wonderful and lovely, and I had cleared everything out of the shop in order to make room for this party. And about a week after the party, I noticed that I was not putting anything back, and wondering, why is that? Why am I not putting my shop back together? Why am I so reluctant to sort of get things going when this 5-year anniversary was meant to be my stepping stone to the next version of my shop art string? And again, I listened to the intuition. I got that same buzzy body feel, and I heard this voice that felt like it was my anthropomorphized shop voice speaking to me. And she said, "I think we're done here." And I said, "What?" She said, "I think we're done here." And other than doing one final job for, I think it was a Verizon commercial, I never put the shop back together again. We were done.
When you say you did work on commercials, like what kind of things would you do? Would it be the clothing? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was a combination of things. There was definitely a lot of clothing. There were things like sweaters and hats. Strangely, over the course of my time there, including that final Verizon job, twice I was asked to make a sweater that would fit an entire family. So the first time was for a Radio Shack commercial, and there were 4 necks in it with 4 different people, a mom, a dad, and 2 kids, all at different heights. So that was a technical challenge on my end to figure out how the bottom of the sweater was at the same level while each of the necks and shoulders were at different levels. So yeah, there was that sweater. And then that final sweater that I made for Verizon was a one sweater with a giant neck hole that fit a family of 4. So things like that. There were also set pieces. I did an Old Navy commercial where basically the whole set was knitted. There was a whole kitchen with cabinets and trays and tables and chairs, a fireplace, in fact, all kinds of things. So that was one of my most fun jobs and most challenging jobs, in fact, which I nearly did not get. A stylist who I had worked with on a Converse commercial years earlier came into my shop one day and said, "Hey, I landed a commercial. I'm doing the wardrobe for it. And I want you to know that I put your name in the ring to art department because it's all knitted and you should be the one to do it." And I got very excited and I waited for the call and I waited for the call and I waited for the call and it never came. And I was super bummed. And I tried to get back into a good frame of mind. And I said, I trust there's a good reason for me not getting this job. Some other job will come in. And sure enough, I got a call the next day for an Axe deodorant commercial that needed these sort of funny Peruvian masks made. So I started making those. And halfway through that job, which was like a 2-day job, which was fairly standard. There's really, really quick turnaround times in Hollywood. So a lot of sleepless nights on my end. But about halfway through that job, I decided like, okay, I'm going to think really positively and say, well, maybe possibly I got this job and I'll still somehow get the Old Navy job. And lo and behold, I got a call the next day from Old Navy saying, hey, we hired these other people to do this commercial, but it's not happening. It's not happening fast enough. Do you think you could do this one piece for the Old Navy commercial? And I said, sure. And they came by and they brought me the specific materials they wanted me to use. And I made it. I called them and I said, it's done. And they said, great. And they came to pick it up. And when they came to pick it up, they said, hey, do you think you could make this other piece too? Because the other people are taking too long on it. And I said, sure. So I made that and they came to pick it up and they brought me a few more things and said, hey, could you just make all of these things too? So by the end of that week, I don't know what percentage, maybe 80% or something of the knitting that needed to be done on that commercial, I ended up getting to do. So that was pretty cool. And actually ended up being, we'll talk about it later, but ended up being one of the great inspirations for the project that we're working on now 13 years ago.
How do you, I can't even fathom how you can knit that fast.
Aha.
So what's the secret of knitting props that quickly?
So it's a combination. One thing that I failed to mention is that about 6 weeks before I opened my shop, I had been knitting traditionally with, the 2 sticks that you're used to seeing people knit with for about 10 years. And over the course of those 10 years, several people, I think it was 3 times total during that time, one of whom said to me, your knitting is very even. It looks like it was done on a knitting machine. And he offered, he had a business with his wife and offered to actually give me a knitting machine. And I had no interest whatsoever. I thought it's cheating. It's, I just don't want to do it. So I avoided that for many, many years until about 6 weeks before I opened my shop. A friend of mine, I was teaching yoga at the time, another side hustle. And she wanted some private yoga lessons from me. And she happened to be a machine knitter. and she had a machine that she wanted to get rid of that she hadn't been using. And she said, can I trade you private yoga classes for this knitting machine? And I had very, very poor boundaries, and I didn't know how to say no. And even though I was 100% certain that I would not use the machine and it would just go into the back of the closet, I said yes anyway. And so she came over to my house. We spent about a half an hour. She showed me the basic mechanics. It's a very basic, they have very fancy knitting machines out there that do all kinds of cool things. This was about as basic as it gets, a manual knitting machine that has a carriage that slides across a bunch of latch hooks and allows one to knit an entire row in essence, in the same amount of time that it takes one to knit a single stitch on traditional sticks. And when she left my house, I sat down at this knitting machine and just practiced the few things that she had shown me. And I started to realize this isn't cheating. This is an entirely different art form. And there are certain things that lend themselves really well to knitting machines. And there are certain things that lend themselves really well to hand knitting. And I still employ both techniques on most pieces that I make. There are certain things that are really difficult to do on a knitting machine that are far, far easier to do on two sticks and vice versa. So what happened was after she left, and I was fiddling around on this machine, I became obsessed with it the same way that I had become obsessed with those two sticks 10 years earlier. And other than sleeping, I didn't get up from that machine for 2 weeks. I just tried to figure out everything I could possibly do on it. I tried to figure out every mistake that I could make and how to not only fix the mistake if I wanted to fix it, but how to sort of purposefully make a mistake in order to put some texture or a certain kind of design into the knitting and really get into hand manipulating the stitches while they were on the machine. And over the next couple of weeks, I was having a lot of trouble sleeping, and it was sort of MySpace style. If you remember, they used to have the slideshows of photographs, like the carousel that would go around. And all of a sudden, as I was trying to go to sleep at night, I kept seeing this carousel of photographs just flashing before my eyes and of different designs that had never been in my head before. And I would see and go, I want to make that. I want to make that. I want to make that. And I realized that just the ability to speed up certain parts of the knitting all of a sudden opened up my brain. It wouldn't have been worth experimenting with all of these different designs by hand, because it literally would have taken weeks to find out whether or not it was going to work. And because I all of a sudden had this ability to move quicker in certain ways, it opened up the space in my creativity to all of a sudden have access to these designs that I don't think would have shown up for me otherwise. And it was during that time, I remember speaking with my friend Marco. I was feeling very frustrated working with him and not on my own stuff. It was probably the first week that I was using that knitting machine. And I said to him, I just want to do something else. I don't know what it is. I mean, I definitely don't want a store. And 6 weeks later, I had a store. So that's how I can move faster on certain things. There are just certain things that, if I'm making a basic rectangle for something, that can go, 10, 20, 30 times faster on a knitting machine.
So this Radio Shack sweater that you talked about earlier,
yes.
Was that all hand knitted, or was that utilizing the knitting machine?
That was a combination of the two.
Okay.
Yeah. So all of that ribbing at the neckline and down at the bottom, and all of those trees, that was all hand knitting. The sleeves were hand knitting and everything was assembled by hand. But the beginnings anyway of the red fabric were done on a knitting machine.
It sounds intense, trying to meld the two together. Maybe it's not, but in my brain, because I don't knit, it seems incredibly difficult to switch from one to the other. Is that true or not really?
It was at the time. It was really very challenging for me at the time. But the knitting machine part was actually just trying to wrap my head around how that worked. But no, I mean, yeah, I don't really know how to explain it, but it's fairly natural for me now to go back and forth between the two.
Just part of the process.
Yeah, it's just part of the process. There are just certain parts of it that are easier on a machine and certain parts that are easier by hand. And I tend to employ a lot of crochet work as well. There isn't any crochet work in that particular piece, but oftentimes in a lot of my designs, there would be, crocheted necklines or hems or details here and there. The difference there is just, rather than using 2 sticks, it's using 1 hook.
Okay.
But it's all really a matter of just tying different versions of knots. And, speaking of which, knitting is, my understanding anyway, sort of the precursor to the computer. It's binary code. It's all ones and zeros. It's knitting and purling. Everything is pretty much comprised of some combination of these 2 stitches.
So when would you use crochet as opposed to knitting? I mean, how is the difference applied?
Me personally, or why would somebody?
Or you personally, or?
Yeah. So crocheting tends to be, unless there are ways of manipulating all of these things so that they come out the way that you want them. But generally speaking, crochet creates a denser fabric than knitting does. Again, there are ways of manipulating so that it doesn't do that. But generally speaking, that's true. So it really lends itself well to things that might want more structure. So I might want more structure as, around a neckline or something. And knitting tends to create a drapier fabric. One can create a drapier fabric with crochet, but it typically means that it's lacier and more see-through. And if you want something that is not see-through with crochet, it's likely going to be fairly stiff. And knitting, you can get something that's not see-through, but still has a lot of, beautiful drape to it. So I tend to do the bulk of my work is knitting. And it's what I learned first. I have a love for it, but crochet comes into play oftentimes, especially if I want more structure.
So I pulled up this image of a sweater here.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite pieces, actually.
And so when we're talking about structure and giving it texture and that sort of thing, this is what we're talking about?
Well, one would think, but there is no crochet in this piece. That's all 100% knitted. The texture and structure that you're looking at on those shoulders is a combination of knitted braids and cables that I then hand manipulated and stitched directly onto the sweater. So I made a really basic sweater, very straightforward shape, and with, a standard ribbed hem, ribbed cuffs, and ribbed neckline. And then separately, I made many, many, many braids and cables, and just meticulously one by one to make sure that it was even on, from one shoulder to the other, would apply them by hand and slowly built up that texture.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
So how long did it take you to feel really confident in your knitting? Is it a skill that takes a long time, or is it something that's developed fairly quickly?
I think, like anything, it's really like sort of the level of intensity that one might have about it. So I started feeling relatively confident in my hand knitting skills within the first couple of years, but because I was doing so much of it, and really the same thing happened once I got onto the machine. If I had only been knitting a couple of times a week, that would have taken me much, much longer. But I was knitting for hours and hours and hours every day. So that confidence built up fairly quickly. But there are still things that I'm not confident in. And in part because, it's a double-edged sword, this whole like not wanting to do somebody else's pattern. Part of that was that there was less available at the time, at least, on the internet. So while I was sitting on set all day, I didn't have access to anybody else's work. I didn't have much of a choice but to experiment and figure things out on my own. But at some point, that became preferable because I didn't really learn the basics. I didn't learn the language that a lot of other knitters speak. And so when it came time to figuring something out, it just made more sense to do it on my own because I was too deep at that point to try to, and too lazy, to be perfectly honest, to go back and learn that language well enough to be able to follow somebody else's sequence of numbers and directions. But what that also meant is that I didn't learn some of those basics. So I don't have some of the terminology. So I feel a little bit, I don't have a lot of confidence speaking to other really experienced knitters because they have an understanding and a language that I don't have. But I also have the ability to make stuff up and not be reliant on what already exists in the world.
So really, it really helped form you as your own entity, your own artist with this vision by not following patterns and not really consulting with other knitters, just figuring it out on your own. And you speaking earlier in the conversation, you talked about seeing this imagery that was flashing through your head.
Yeah.
You just sound like you're absolutely a visual person, and you get these things that just kind of come to you, and then you just figure out how to make them.
Maybe. Yes. And number one, that's the first time that had ever happened to me, which is why it floored me. I'd never had things like that come into my head before. And I do think that it was just that there was room for it all of a sudden because there was an avenue to be able to experiment in a way that wouldn't have taken me weeks and months to find out whether or not something would work. And as far as being really visual, I don't know. I mean, sometimes I have these visions of things and I can translate them, but a lot of it, I'm very, very manual and tactile, and a lot of these things come from just doing them. I may have an idea of where I'm going when I start, but oftentimes the work becomes something else by the time I get there.
So lots of trial and error.
Basically all trial and error. Yeah, basically all trial and error.
Well, looking at your work, it's absolutely magnificent.
Thank you very much.
And then what you're creating now is just out of this world as far as I'm concerned. Thank you for sharing your journey and how this all kind of, the catalyst and how it all kind of came into being. Ken, I'm going to give you the floor now and let you kind of talk about like where you're from and your background, if you will.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Columbus, Ohio, University Hospital, and was raised in a number of incredibly small towns in coal country in southern Colorado. My father was a mission pastor, so he, my earliest memories were of him on Sundays doing his thing at 5 different churches. So it was like Sundays were an incredibly intense day. And, looking back on that, the way, my understanding of his job at the time was that he was I would describe him as a turnaround specialist. It seemed like the churches that he went to were struggling. And as soon as that was over with, he'd move on to another one. Probably pretty common thing for PKs or preachers' kids to get roped into their, parents' work. So a lot of choirs, a lot of holiday singing with the family, that sort of thing. A lot of music in the home. we did a lot of, my dad was pretty radical for the time, I think. We did a lot of clown and mime and puppetry as a part of his ministry. So I don't know that it was necessarily my thing at the time, but I got roped into his thing, and looking back on it, I'm incredibly grateful for it because learning how to make costumes or sew Muppet style puppets or do voiceovers, or I think now looking back, I felt pretty confident in terms of being creative. I didn't necessarily feel very confident at the time. I mean, I was a little kid, so a lot of stage fright, did a lot of community theater, was always in, drama class. Those were kind of my people. I mean, I was an athlete as well, but I felt most at home with the theater kids. And the drama teachers were always my favorite teachers. And then, like Emilie, I graduated from high school early as well. I signed up for the Navy at 16, graduated early from high school, left at 17. I was really clear that I wanted to do something heroic. And looking back on that thought, it's sometimes hard for me to believe how clear I was that doing something heroic was so important to me at the time. Spent 4 years in the Navy and absolutely hated it. I mean, I was so mad that I had joined the Navy. I grew up, I was a latchkey kid. I sometimes, well, probably more than sometimes, oftentimes wouldn't be home until 9 or 10 o'clock at night, as long as I can remember. Both my parents worked, and I just didn't like being at home. My sister was a great student. She was always home early, and I was always home. I remember the one house that we lived in, it was at the top of a hill, and I could always, there's a power line that crossed the top of the road. And so I could see when one of my parents was coming home, and I would make a mad dash, and slip, it was like sliding in the home plate, getting inside the house right before my parents got home. Yeah. So some Navy time. I spent a lot of time in the restaurant industry. I've had a lot of different jobs, a lot of, little small businesses. Wasn't doing a whole lot of art at the time, for a chunk of time, but sort of found my way back into it when I was managing a restaurant, and we were going through a renovation, and, the walls were bare and we needed something on them. And so, started asking around, met some artists, and I just got sucked into it. I mean, it was a world. They were really conceptual artists. I was getting off work at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning anyway. And so I would stay up until 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning talking with them, and was just really captivated, by their work, but the way they thought about things and the lengths to which they would go to express what it is that had their attention at the time. I sort of found myself, I certainly wasn't a founding member. They had a multimedia arts collaborative called Group, and I was certainly not a founding member, but I was the guy who could get things done, whether it was getting us on the radio or ordering porta potties for our happenings, or, the parties that we were throwing underground with, 50 artists and performance art. I was just the one that seemed to be able to get things done. And that was that was the role that I found myself in, until one of them said, "Hey, you should make some art," which just was a out of left field thing for me to even contemplate. But I started doing it, and I had a good time with it. I really enjoyed, doing it, making installations, but always still spent most of my time, I would say, being more of a producer, filling in the gaps, maybe herding cats, finding partners. I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most is, the work that we do together. I think I agree with you. I think Emilie's work is incredible. Like, I'm floored not only by what she makes, but watching how she goes about doing it. And I like finding partnerships and making connections out in the world. And, how can we, bringing our work out into the world in a way that is meaningful and beautiful. That's how I like to spend most of my time, and just visualizing where those connections can be made and how it is that we can align what it is that we do with what other people are doing in a way that's sort of a 1 + 1 = 3, I guess.
So I got a question. I want to back up. You said you were in the Navy. What was your MOS?
I was an operations specialist.
Okay.
Yeah.
What made you hate it so much?
Well, I grew up doing whatever it is that, fourth grade, I was coming home at 10 o'clock.
Right.
So I never had anybody telling me what to do.
Gotcha.
And then suddenly I had somebody telling me what to do. And I think deep down, I knew that I needed that. And I had romanticized what being in the Navy would be like, to the point that I didn't really pay attention to what the realities of that might be like.
Right.
And so, first day in boot camp, they really do throw the trash can.
Yeah.
And they really do wake you up that way. And then they yell at you because you jumped out of, bed and have bare feet on the floor. And then they yell at you to get back in bed. And they yell at you because you got your clothes on in your bed. I mean, I went in thinking, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL and I'm going to do this for 20 years. And I'll tell you, the very next morning, I was like, what the hell were you thinking? And yeah, so I wanted to be an intelligence specialist. As a kid, I have fond memories of wanting to be a spy. And I think I carried that with me, and wanted to get into the intelligence work in the Navy. And somehow the I became an O, and I went from being an intelligence specialist to an operations specialist. And basically, I worked in the tactical nerve center of the ship. So if you've seen the movie Top Gun, where they're sitting in the dark room looking at radar, that was where I worked.
Okay. I was just curious because, we all go in it romanticized, right? All I heard growing up from my dad was how great the Marine Corps was. And then when I went in, I had the same experiences, like trash cans coming down the quarterdeck, and all of a sudden you're flying out of the bed, and your first thought is like, where the hell am I and what am I doing here? So
yeah.
So do you think?
And I was going to say, I hated it so much that I tried to get kicked out.
Gotcha.
I did some research on sleepwalking, and because the guy that I had joined with on the buddy program that we actually didn't end up getting stationed together, I had heard that he had gotten kicked out for sleepwalking. I thought, I can do that. I grew up in the theater. I can pretend to do that. And so I probably studied for that role more than any other. It didn't work. The guy who was on watch, who caught me, did me a favor, and didn't turn me in. But it was a really pivotal point. Remember, I was in Dam Neck, Virginia, and I walked out onto the pier, and I was so mad. I mean, I was just cursing God. As soon as I started to lose my voice from all the yelling and screaming, I had this epiphany that I was here because of a choice that I made. Like, nobody in my family tried to talk me into doing this. And I just had this, it was like you could almost hear the switch, the click of the switch in my head. And I thought, I volunteered for this. I'm the one who signed up. I'm going to do the best possible job I can, and then I'm getting the hell out. And that's what I did.
Yeah. How do you think it informed your life now, or has it? And maybe in the simple way, like, well, thinking through things more and trying to, but how has being 4 years in the Navy informed how you're living your life now, or has it?
Well, so one of the things, I was born in Ohio, and my dad had a job in Georgia, and the culture shock around that was pretty intense. And I remember the first day of of Sunday school at that church. I was, a little kid walking up the steps, and I heard this voice, this older gentleman say, "Hey, you the new preacher's boy?" And I was like, "Yep." And he said, "You say yes, sir, to me, boy." And I was like, "I don't say yes, sir, to anybody." I mean, I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I had just never heard that before. I put my foot down and I refused to say yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, to anyone. And that was true the entire time I was in the Navy as well. So the point being that the part of me that is resistant or that is stubborn, I'm definitely able to track that in myself. But I think the part that has been most useful is coming up with creative workarounds. It's okay to refer to your captain as captain instead of sir. So I found a way to be true to who it is that I was, while at the same time not getting in trouble. And I think that's still alive and well in me. Like, how can I be true to myself while at the same time not suffering as a result of that? So that for sure. And then also being very, very cognizant of the things that I commit to that are my idea, that I don't try to blame something outside of myself for the circumstances, that I'm very, very conscious of the choices that I make.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just always curious, because we're all informed by our past. So thanks for sharing that. And yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And the longer I'm out, the better it seems that I went in.
Yeah.
I still have really close friends that I served with. I mean, I'm 55. So, 30 plus years. And there are still guys that I, talk to from time to time, that I served with. And, this was, Cold War, a lot of time in the Indian Ocean. So at that point, it was the Soviets were the boogeyman at the time. And I remember we were out to sea, and we pulled up, alongside a Russian trawler. And, we were out on the flight deck listening to, we had a DOD band that was on our ship at the time. We were out there barbecuing and drinking Pepsi, and our shirts were off, and we were having a great time. And we pulled up next to this little Russian ship. And it was the first time that we'd actually seen the enemy. And they looked just like us. And like, we spent a lot of time talking about things that mattered. And we had this shared experience of watching, a Russian version of ourselves. And we're like, we don't hate these people, like, yeah, we didn't hate any of them. We didn't know any of them, and figured they were probably there the same reason we were.
Yep, that's true.
Yep.
So you mentioned, Ken, that you did a lot of restaurant work and worked in the restaurant industry. What were you doing between and being involved with this collective group? What were you doing between that time and the time or the moment that you ended up connecting with Emilie?
So I was steeped in the arts, and I had a job, and most of my arts friends were struggling financially anyway. And I was noticing this pattern. Like, there was an identity piece, the starving artist, and they were making really cool art. And at the same time, they weren't getting the traction that they wanted. So I was aware of what felt like a downside to being an artist if you were wanting to create something solid in your life. at least with these folks. I'm trying to think how it is. I was reading a Daniel Pink book where he was talking about design thinking. And there was something, just reading about the way that he was referring to design and how it was being used. I felt a real sense of relief around the idea of that. And I was on the phone with a friend of mine who was a teacher at the Nueva School in San Francisco, which was attached to the D School, the design school at Stanford. And I was on the phone with her and I was like, yeah, I just read this book. And she's like, oh my goodness, you have no idea what you've stumbled onto. You have got to come out here and visit this school. And I said, all right. So I did. And I think we did a 30-minute introduction to design thinking in that elementary school. And the next day, I was at the D School at Stanford. Somehow found myself sitting on a panel evaluating prototypes that graduate students in their education school were presenting their ideas on how to transfer knowledge from one generation of teacher to the next. And I was hooked. Like, it was a creative discipline that, I would say that in my experience, art was about exploring ideas and sharing ideas, and design was about solving things in a way that my experience of art was not about solving anything. Like I said, I was hooked. And I came home from, 3 days in California, and I was like, I'm diving into this design thing. And so I started facilitating design thinking workshops for anybody and everybody who would do it. I would do them at libraries, did them with my friends. And I did that for probably 10 years. The sustainability movement was sort of rather in its infancy, at least in Northeast Ohio at the time. So I would facilitate design thinking in healthcare, in education. Manufacturing in Ohio is a really big part of the economy. And I just noticed, I'm like, wow, this is a tool and a process that I can facilitate this for anybody. And I don't know that if I started to make a name for myself, but I was at the time I was the only person that I knew that was doing this. And so I spent, a good number of years doing that. And at the same time, one of my mentors was sort of at the leading edge of what's called equine assisted learning. So it's working with horses on the ground in a highly relational way. The combination of the design work and the horse work in terms of building teams, leadership development, cultural competency, how to communicate. Those two things combined were a really powerful combination for me personally. So then one day I was doing a free workshop in a library in Cleveland Heights. And one of the people who was in attendance said, hey, I'm working with this NGO and we're bringing students over from India to the United States. And I think that this would be a really cool component for that. You should meet the guy who's, runs this organization. And I did. And he said, I want you to design a master's level course for these students. And I had no idea. I think I went to college for a year. I spent most of my time playing volleyball. So the idea of designing a master's level course, I was not qualified for that. But I had discovered that that's one of the beautiful things about design is if you can design things, then the idea of being qualified for them isn't necessary. And in fact, might be a detriment. So, one thing led to another, and I ended up designing the entire program. And it ended up being a postdoctoral research fellowship for master's or medical school graduates from India who are coming to the United States to get into the field of long-term care, which I also knew nothing about. So I ended up doing that for 2 years, which included 6 months of me in India. One of the things about design is, designing a solution and then go looking for a problem to fit that solution. And we had what I think was a great program, but I had never talked to any of the students in India. Like, I didn't know if this mattered to them at all. So sort of midstream, I went to India for 6 months and I worked with a team of students who had graduated from one of our earlier cohorts. And we traveled from Delhi all over Punjab, which is northern India, where it borders with Pakistan. And we went to every medical college, every nursing school, dental, like anything, nursing homes, temples. We just took a really deep dive into how are older people in India receiving their care. And also talking with students and trying to find out, like, what is it that we can design that would be meaningful to these students, but at the same time start to address some of the challenges that existed in the lives of people who were older and maybe not receiving the care that they wanted or the care that their family wanted for them. Every time you solve one problem, you create at least one more. And, one of the things that, India has gotten really good at is meeting the world's needs for physicians and engineers. And what happens is that because older folks receive their care because their children can make a good living, the children, who are adults at this point, are moving away from India to go to the UK or Australia, the United States, anywhere to get a job as a physician or an engineer. And they take their kids with them. And one of the things that we noticed is that that's two generations of people or two threads in the support network that are gone. So we had a lot of people in the United States who were like, "Hey, Ken, you're going to India. Are you going to go to Amritsar? If you do, could you stop and check on my parents? Because, they're just racked with guilt because they're not there to help take care of their parents. And that's, a big part of the culture." So I did a lot of design work, a lot of interesting places. And it's still, one of the things that I hold is, the tension between art and design in my experience. Like, what is art good for? What is design good for? How do you put them together? And I think the clearest answer that I've come up with so far is that, the work that we do together, we're really trying to create well-designed art. So it's how do we stick the landing with the projects that we do such that they make a difference in ways that are reflective of the impact that we intend to make, and try not to leave too much of that up to chance and really design our art in a way that it's going to be effective in a way that, we can be happy with when it's over.
So in the context of what you're talking about, how do you define design? What is the definition of design?
Well, my reactive self would say, I don't want to be responsible for defining it.
But the reason I say that is because, when we think of design, especially probably in the context of this podcast, we're thinking of like graphic design and those kind of things. But you're more talking about design of systems, aren't you?
The simplest way I'd boil it down to design is a process. And it is a process that graphic designers use. It's a process that interior designers use. Anybody who is intentionally creating something so design thinking as a process looks at, here's a challenge. Let's brainstorm some ideas. Let's build a low resolution prototype, balloons, popsicle sticks, like low res. We don't want to overinvest in making a thing for a number of reasons. One, it's expensive. Two, it might not work. Three, we can get overly attached to the thing that we make, such that we overinvest in that thing and don't make room for creating the next best version of that thing. So design is an iterative process. And the rule of thumb that, I heard along the way was that if you iterate on an idea 7 times, then the thing you come up with on the 7th iteration is 1,000 times better than what you came up with the first one. And so that process can be used for anything. And the beautiful thing about design is people don't intentionally set out to design a worse version of anything. Nobody's like, ooh, let's make a worse mousetrap. Like, people have been trying to figure out how to make a better mousetrap for a long, long time. And, I used to think that we're all designers. And I don't know if that's true. However, there are certain capacities, like empathy is a good example. Empathy, I see empathy as like a muscle. And as we grow older, we use it less, so it atrophies. The capacity and the interest, frankly, to empathize or step into the experience of an other person and create a solution to, or in my case, I'm much more interested in facilitating other people to design their own solutions. Because ideally, I would step into an organization, help sort of uncover or build the capacity for a team to create solutions to their own problems, and then never have to go back. Like, ideally, that would be the case. It's not often the case because these things take time. But one of the beautiful things about design and empathy is the greater your capacity for empathy, the greater your capacity to design. The greater your capacity to design, the greater your capacity for empathy. So it is it's a feedback loop that getting better at one makes you better at the other and vice versa. So I guess to answer your question, I would describe or define design as a process that taps into the innate capacities that we have as people, and that my role would be to support people to leverage the thing that they naturally have. And sometimes that's just making people aware that it exists. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to give context to the whole, when we're talking about, or that was a great example. And that's what makes the work that you were doing so interesting, is this marriage between, like you were talking about, empathy and design, and how does that interact with each other. And that whole design thinking thing is what's going to solve problems. And I just really respect people that do that kind of work. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure. Yeah, I think it is cool work. We did a design thinking workshop in Walsenburg, and I think our youngest person in that room, Emily, you'll have to check my memory here, but I think she might have been 8.
I think she was even younger. I think she might have
Was
been
she?
6 or 7. Yeah.
Yeah. And the oldest, I mean, we didn't ask this lady how old she was, but I mean, she was in her 80s. And, to see young people sort of operating on an equal footing with people who are older than them in a world that, there's a power dynamic that normally exists between, people who are young and old. And in this context, there were advantages and disadvantages that come with being younger or older. One of the beautiful things about being creative when you're young and you don't know too much is that what you know doesn't stand in your way. They call that beginner's mind. And one of the things that seems to stand in the way when, older people feel like they know what they need to know is they miss out on the opportunities that exist in the not knowing place. So being, watching that power dynamic, I don't know that it disintegrates or it gets dismantled in any way. But when you see an amazing idea come from a young person and that idea impact somebody who's much older than they are, it's just really a beautiful thing to watch.
Tenet wants to acknowledge our media sponsor, New Magazine. That's N-U-E. You can follow both the national and the Denver edition of New Magazine on Instagram. The national edition can be found at new_magazine and the Denver edition at new_Denver_magazine. And I want to share with you something very exciting. Check out the newly launched New Denver Gallery Guide. Look for the signage that says New Denver Gallery Guide that has a QR code. Scan it with your phone, and you have instant access to a comprehensive digital guide to Denver's finest galleries and exhibitions. Find this QR code in your favorite gallery, hotel, or coffee shop as you visit and explore Denver. Thanks for listening.
I'm Emilie Odeile.
And I'm Ken Chapin.
And you are listening to the Tenet Podcast.
You have your life, Ken, and you've been doing all this work in various capacities with design. And then Emilie has her thing going on in LA. Like, how do these two worlds meet from, because you were in Ohio at the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Emilie's in California. How do you guys connect?
Fortune. Luck.
Yes.
Divine
Serendipity.
intervention. Destiny. Well, so I was working with Design College, early high school, as I think what they were called. They were a new school in Cleveland that was based, they were a design school. And I think at that time they were only 9th and 10th graders. And I was doing a year-long culture change initiative where we were integrating elements of design into the culture of that school, which was, working with teachers, faculty, students. I did an open house by myself. One of these things I probably wouldn't repeat, but I think there were 109 students, and I facilitated a design thinking workshop for these younger people. And they were identifying the challenges that they were confronting in their own lives. And one of them was poverty. Now, they also did things like, how do we keep people from tearing the soap dispensers off the wall in the bathroom? Like, there's real stuff like that, too. But they were looking at things like recidivism and violence and racism. I mean, things that would seem like they were just way too big and way too heavy for sweet young people to have to be thinking about. And one of them was poverty. And they came up with the idea that if we owned our own business, then we wouldn't have to worry about working for other people. And, at the time, the internet was relatively new. It was certainly relatively new to me. And, this idea of starting a business is a lot, the barriers to entry for starting a business are lower because, you don't have the brick and mortar need. But, I had never started an online business before, so I really had no idea what the hell I was talking about. I just heard it and thought that it was relevant. One thing led to another. I started making these giant knitting needles. A friend of mine was a knitter. I think she probably knew I was, crafty. He was like, "Hey, look at these things." And I thought, "Oh, sure. Look at that." It meant nothing to me. I hadn't knitted a stitch then, and still to this day, I haven't. Emily's the knitter. I'm the needle maker. So I started designing these knitting needles so that I could have an example to share with the younger kids that I was working with, so I wasn't talking out of my ass, to be honest. So I created these knitting needles and created an Etsy shop just so that I could had something to point to. That was an extreme example of, even if you've never knitted a stitch, and you know nothing about knitting, you can design something and turn it into a business. And I don't know if I would give that advice, but it's true, because I ended up designing and the world's largest collection of giant knitting needles. And that's how Emilie was one of my first customers. Actually, it may have been my first customer. And I'll let her pick it up from here.
Well, at that point, I was, I'm not sure what year that was, maybe 2013, something like that. So for about 10 years at that point, I had been looking for giant knitting needles that did not exist on the market. I was always trying to, figure out different ways of knitting and innovating the craft to do things that I wanted to do. And up until that point, my only options, there was a couple of makers out there, needle makers made a size 35. And even I think at that point, the 50s may have existed already, which is a pretty darn big needle compared to your traditional little sticks. I don't know exactly. Maybe you know better than I do, actually, how big the 50 is. Is that an inch in diameter?
50s are 1 inch in diameter. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a pretty darn big needle. And they existed. Of course, they only existed in a 12-inch length at the time. So one was very limited to how many stitches one could put on those needles. It was good for a big old chunky scarf, and that's about it. And so, I wanted to do more than that. And so I was doing a variety of things. I was using things like broom handles in order to get a longer length knitting needle to create the things I wanted to create. I was also tricking my stitches into being bigger, which for any knitters out there really just means double wrapping, triple wrapping one's stitches in order to make them 2 or 3 times larger than you can get them on a needle. But the problem with that, of course, is in order to maintain even stitching, you've got to have all those extra loops on the needle until the next row. And so it really crowds the needles. And once again, left with only being able to do a chunky scarf because there's just not enough room to put all of those stitches on. So I had been looking for these needles, and I wanted needles even bigger than the size 50s and even longer than the ones that were available. And they just did not exist. I looked everywhere, high and low. And I finally, sometime in, I think, 2013, was about an inch away from having somebody make me a custom pair so that I could finally have the needles I really wanted so that I didn't have to do all of these workarounds in order to get the fabric that I was looking for. And right before I was about to give them the green light to go ahead and make these things for me, I said, let me just check one more time. And I got online. I went to Etsy, and lo and behold, about a month earlier, some dude had opened up a shop. And not only did he have the very needles that I had been looking for, including circular needles. So for, that's for knitters out there. Those really didn't exist on the market at all. Large knitting needles that were circular in size, which allows somebody to make, a tubular item without any seams in it, which is kind of cool at large scale. But he had even more sizes than I had in my head. I mean, he went up to, I think, 2 inches in diameter. They were enormous. He had super long ones. He had circular ones. And add to that, they were beautiful. I mean, he had made them so beautifully out of wood and inlays and all kinds of fun stuff. And so I hit the pause on those custom knitting needles and went ahead, and it was actually my mother who was going to have my stepdad make them for me. And I called her up and I said, never mind. Don't have him make me those needles. Just go to this Etsy shop, and this is your Christmas present to me. And she ordered them. I got them. I started using them immediately and adored them. And I got a call from my mom maybe a month later saying, I got an email from that man who I bought the needles from, and he was asking me how I like them. But of course, I'm not the one who's using them. So I forwarded your information to him. So you might be getting a call from him. And he was looking for feedback on these needles because, like he said, he didn't use them himself. And so, wanted some feedback in order to design the next best version of them. And so we chatted on the phone, and it turned out he was going to be visiting Los Angeles with his then girlfriend at the time. And we set up a date for them to come to the shop. And, so that we could have a conversation about the needles. He did a little promo video about my shop and his needles at the time. And so we met. He went back, I think, to, I don't know where he was living at the time, actually, San Francisco, maybe. Mm-hmm. And we each went back to our own lives. I continued using his needles. I bought some more needles from him that next year. And made all kinds of fun things with them. And every so often he would give me a call or shoot me an email saying, hey, I've got a knitting client who has this question and I don't know how to answer it because I don't knit. So, can you tell me what to tell her? And, we'd chit chat about it, or I'd shoot him an email in response. And that's the way our very professional relationship went for a good year and a half. And then one day, I don't know what happened, but we were chatting on the phone and something shifted. And I think it was within a month of that first conversation where I got this sense that something was happening, that I blurted out of nowhere some idea to maybe meet him on the road for some road trip. And the minute it came out of my mouth, I thought, what the hell did you just say? But it was too late. It was already out of my mouth. And we started talking about meeting up, and things happened very, very quickly. I think it was a matter of weeks, really, that we decided he should come out and visit me in Los Angeles. And I pushed it a few weeks because I was getting ready for my 5-year anniversary. And I told him that if he was there for it, I would be too distracted and I had too much to do and, needed to be on my game. And so I wouldn't let him come out until the week after that party, which, coincidentally happened, I believe, after that moment that I had with my own shop when she told me that we were done. So about a week after that, he showed up, and that was our first date. I picked him up at the airport, and we spent the next maybe 4 or 5 days together. I think about 2 or 3 weeks after that, I flew out to Colorado for his family reunion, where I met his entire extended family. So that was a fun second date. And then a few weeks after that, I had been in the process of closing down my shop, because I do listen when stores talk to me. And so I was closing up my shop, and he came out, helped me pack up the final things, scared the crap out of me because he moves around so fast and packing all of my stuff. And I thought, what on earth am I doing? But there I found myself in the truck with him, driving out to Colorado to live together with his son. We did a lot. We skipped a lot of steps and just jumped right on in. Really, probably just a matter of a couple of months after things started heating up between us. And, we were talking about it the other day, saying that we would only recommend this path to somebody 8 years in if it works. So if you can project forward 8 years and see that this is going to work for you, by all means, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, oof, man, it was a challenging path to take. And we had a lot of challenges in those first couple of years, but boy, oh boy, am I grateful that we worked through all of that. I think that there was a deep knowing somewhere that this was all going to be worth it. And whatever fantasy I had early on, that it would just magically work out immediately, has unfolded over the years and has become true. It's ludicrous looking back to think that I thought that would be true immediately. And it's so much more meaningful now for it to be true this far in, and for it to feel more true every day that we're together. And I didn't know that we would end up working so beautifully together. And that too took a long time, even though we sort of melded our strengths and have run the knitting business along with some of my pattern writing, which, like I said, was, that's been challenging for me because I don't really know how to read patterns. So how on earth can I write patterns that other people can read? I think that will continue to be a challenge for me moving forward. But, it's really been in these last couple of years that I think we kind of found our stride together, how to really capitalize on our strengths to build a business together, to build a life together, to create art together, to design how all of that works together, to walk our dog every day together. So yeah, that's how we met.
Take a moment and describe Ken in 3 words, if you would.
Describe Ken in 3 words?
Yeah. Pick 3 words that you would use to describe Ken.
Brilliant. Strong. Creative.
And Ken, you take 3 words and describe Emilie for me.
Loving. Courageous. I want to say brilliant because it captures a whole bunch, but she already used that one. Loving, courageous, and soft.
So you've joined forces as Artners, but it's taken a little while to figure it out, like in most relationships. How does this thing work? How do you make this thing go?
Well, so one of the things that's really amazing from my perspective about this partnership, and it's something that I never thought I would get to participate in, is that Ken has really gifted me the opportunity to dive into my own artistry and creativity without having to do everything else myself. While I think it's been incredibly beneficial to me to have been responsible for 100% of everything in past ventures of mine, I've learned a lot, but it's also held me back in certain ways because, the irony, of course, is one of the reasons I started my own business was because I didn't want to work for somebody else, and I didn't want to do admin work, and I didn't want to do all kinds of different things. I wanted to be a creative artist. And the joke of it all that every business owner encounters, I imagine, is that when going into business for oneself, unless you've got gobs of money to pay other people to do it, you're actually responsible for all of that stuff. So, you've got to do all of the creative work, but then you've got to do all of the promotion and all of the cleaning and all of the accounting and everything under the sun. And there's just no possible way to do everything at top level. And certain things have to take priority. And certain things have to fall by the wayside at least some of the time. And, I was always really persistent about my creations and quite prolific. But one of the places where I really fell flat was promoting that work, letting people know what it was that I was doing. And Ken brings so many things to the table, but one of the really obvious things that Ken brings to the table is that he connects with people really easily. And he speaks really beautifully and sweetly about me and the work that I'm doing and the work that we're doing. But he can talk about the work that I'm doing in a way that I really can't. And he is incredibly resourceful and thinks of things that I would never, even if I had the bandwidth to think of them, I likely still wouldn't think of them. So, on these projects that we've been working on in the last couple of years, and specifically the one that's coming up, which is really what the last 2 years have been leading up to, is this very big project that has been sort of swimming around in the back of my head for a good decade now. He has, what I have been doing in all of this is really obvious. It's really obvious to look at a 13-foot frog that's knitted twice and say, wow, I've not seen that before. The person who did that is who I should be paying attention to. In this upcoming project, it's going to be really easy to look at a bookshelf or a dresser or a bed or a painting and say, wow, I've not seen that made out of yarn before. It's obvious who I should be looking to as the shiny object here. But what is less obvious about all of that, number one, is that everything in this upcoming project had to be built. Like walls, floors, furniture, frames, everything in this room had to be built. And 100% of it was built by Ken, which was not the intention. We thought we were going to find stuff out in the world. But as we moved forward, we just thought, like, Ken can do a better job of this. He can make this more accurate. And he's had to take on so much physical work in this project that we never really intended for him to do. And he's done it brilliantly. And so when looking at this set that is about to be revealed in a couple of weeks, there's the obvious part, that's the knitting. The less obvious part is that everything in there was built by Ken. Another less obvious part is that he has made every single phone call. He has written every single email. He has sent out every single press release. He has designed every single graphic. He has secured every single sponsor. He has likely spoken to almost everybody in our community at length about this project at some point or another, and has brought in partners to collaborate on some aspect of this project. While my part in this has been incredibly challenging, and I will own 100% that this was just such a ludicrous idea, and I did not think it through. And it's there was a time when I was making Frog that was a very, very physically challenging project to work on, and literally icing my hands on the daily, because it was incredibly physically challenging. There were times when I was fantasizing about when we were going to move to this Goodnight Moon project, thinking that it would be so much easier than Frog. I was very wrong about that. It is differently challenging than Frog was. There was also a time when I almost felt guilty because it seemed like there's not that much in the Goodnight Moon room. It's not going to be that hard. And now somehow, no matter how many things I get through and cross off the list, it just seems like the list keeps growing. I can't believe how many things there are yet still to make. I really, really misjudged this process. So I don't want to diminish the challenges of this project. At the same time, it's been completely, utterly luxurious for me to get to do what I do and not have to do all of the other things, because not only do I not have the bandwidth for them, but I couldn't do them as well as Ken is doing them. Like, I just couldn't. Even if that's all I were doing, it wouldn't occur to me to do the things that he's doing. So quite obviously, I couldn't have done my part in any of these projects alone. But much more specifically than that, I really couldn't have done my part as well as I hope I'm doing it without Ken. I mean, without Ken specifically.
So this project, and you mentioned Goodnight Moon.
Yes.
Talk about the catalyst that set you on your path to want to do this, and tell, for those who don't know the book Goodnight Moon, talk a little bit about that. Because like Wes had not been familiar with it.
Okay.
I myself have read that story to my children. I can't tell you how many times, hundreds of times, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the catalyst really, I mean, where it all started for me was when I was hired to do that Old Navy job. And I thought it was super cool to get to knit a fireplace and to knit, all of the different gobs of things that I got to knit. But they were very specific, as commercials often are, in the design. So, I was given reference pictures. They even brought me the yarn, which wasn't typical. But for that job, they brought me the yarn that they wanted me to use. And if I'm honest, I really hated it. I hated the colors of the yarn. It completely made sense for the commercial. It was exactly what it needed. But while I was making it, I kept fantasizing about getting to do something this grand and this sort of off-brand for knitting, but to do it in my own color scheme and my own textures, and, get to make all of these choices myself and make something beautiful instead of something sort of quirky. And that's not what we're doing, because we chose a really specific thing where, again, it had very specific colors. But that's when it all started, that I thought, I really want to create an entirely knitted environment. The content of what that was shifted around over the years. It wasn't always Goodnight Moon. It was in the running, but I mainly just wanted to create an immersive environment that was 100% knitting. And for the purists out there, just to be clear, we are calling this installation 100% knitted, but anybody who works with yarn will end up looking closely and saying like, there's knitting here, there's crocheting here, there's punch needle embroidery here, there's latch hook here, there's hand stitch, there's many, many techniques, but probably 90% of it is knitting. The others comprise the rest, and it's all yarn. Goodnight Moon is a classic children's bedtime story. It is this year in its 75th anniversary. So it's been around a long time. Many generations have either read this book to their children or grandchildren, or have been read to by their parents or grandparents or babysitters or siblings. And so it's a beloved children's book that actually has a little bit of a controversial history. It seems like a quaint, sweet story to us now, but it was actually banned by the New York Library when it came out, and did not gain public, like popularity for quite a long time. And in part because at the time, a lot of children's stories were based on fantasy and fantastical adventures. And this was inspired by the author, Margaret Wise Brown's own childhood. From what I understand, is that she and I believe her sister would lay in bed at night saying goodnight, hello and good night to all of the objects in their rooms. And that's part of what inspired her to create this book. And I don't remember what the movement was called, like the realism movement or something like that. Ken will probably remember better, but it was at the forefront of that movement in children's books, where it was really just about basic things. And her research told her that children really appreciated just the very plain, basic things that they were very familiar with. Their combs and their brushes and their lights and their balloons, and their paintings. And so this very, very simple story has been a favorite of so many children over the years. And one of the reasons that we chose this specific time frame to make it is, we made the choice, I want to say almost 2 years ago, to do it. And in doing some research, we saw that it was right about to enter public domain. We were about a year away from that. January 1st, 2023, it was entering public domain. And we thought, okay, let's wait a year to do this, because then we're free and clear. We're not infringing on any copyrights. We don't have to jump through all sorts of hurdles. That'll be the perfect time to make this. And so that's what we did. We waited a year. We started full on production of all of this this past December. And sometime, probably just a few weeks ago, I got an email from somebody who was going to contribute to our sound piece that Ken also conceived of, organized, produced, pretty much all by himself. One Story, Many Voices, which is serving as the soundtrack to our installation. And also providing kids all over the world the ability to listen to this story in, I think now, over 40 different languages. So that's a really cool project. But this lady who was participating in that emailed me and said, hey, I'd love to participate, but do you have the right to be using this story? And I said, oh, yes, of course. It's in the public domain. It entered January 1st. And she said, nuh-uh. Said, what now? She said, yeah, she sent me about 6 different articles, all of which I had already read, announcing the fact that this was entering the public domain. And they had all printed retractions saying, oops, we thought it was going into the public domain, but they filed for an extension. So you have to wait another 20 years. And I thought, oh, shit. We're already well into production. We have our dates. We're promoting it all over the place. What are we supposed to do? did a little bit of research. Turns out because we're offering this event free to the public, technically, legally, we were okay. Sort of falls under fair use. Other people have done installations. We probably wouldn't have had any real legal trouble, but it did not sit well with either one of us. This is why we waited, so that we could be free and clear. As it turns out, just a funny little coincidence. My mother used to be a midwife, and she happened to deliver the grandson of Clement Hurd, who illustrated Goodnight Moon. And her old partner keeps meticulous records and happened to have all of the contact info for Thatcher Hurd, Clement's son. Sent it along to us. We gave him a call. We said, hey, this is what we're doing. Turns out it's not in the public domain. Oh shit, what do we do? And he said, number one, he was very kind. He loves the project. He encouraged us to move forward and reassured us that because we were offering it free to the public, this likely wasn't going to be an issue at all. And we said, I don't know, though. We really feel uncomfortable with it. And he said, here's my contact over at HarperCollins. I'm going to let them know that you're calling. And he connected us there. We had the same conversation with them. They said, we're thrilled that you're doing this, totally on board. Here are the rights. So, we are officially allowed to be doing what it is that we're doing.
So you are essentially illustrating this whole beloved children's book with yarn.
Yes, we are creating a life-sized diorama, just like we all created when we were little kids, like a little shoebox, except this doesn't have a front. It's an open front, so we can see everything. So it's not page by page, but the thing about this book is it all takes place in the same room. So the perspective changes a little bit, the lighting changes a little bit, but otherwise the book all takes place in the great green room, which is a little bunny's bedroom. So what we are creating is, rather than the book itself, we are creating that room. So it is enormous. It, in fact, just grew a couple of weeks ago to be even a little bit bigger than we had planned. It's 8 feet tall. It is either 30 or 32. I think it's now
32.
30.
32.
Is it 32? All right.
Yeah.
Feet wide and 12 feet, 3 inches deep.
15.3.
Oh, 15. That's right. It grew. It's 15, 3 inches deep now. It's enormous. Yeah, it is basically that room. It's funny, actually, when you look really closely at the book from page to page, frustratingly, when you're trying to recreate it, one thing you might notice is that Clement Hurd, the illustrator, changes things. So on one page, a cat's legs look like they're black and white, and on another page, they look fully white. And in one page, the clock looks a little funky, and another page, it looks entirely melted. So while we have been trying to be as accurate as we possibly can, we've also had to take a little bit of creative license here and there and meld certain illustrations together to form what makes the most sense. This sounds crazy, but I'm almost thinking now that Clement Hurd never intended for somebody to recreate his illustrations out of yarn 75 years later. But I think maybe he didn't intend for it, because he sure did change things from page to page. But that's what we're doing.
So in Hollywood, that'd be continuity
Yeah,
issues.
exactly.
Yeah.
There are major continuity issues in this book. Yeah, but we're doing our best, and our hope is that while obviously the fiber element is sort of novel and new and doesn't look anything like a drawing, that overall our intention is to make this as accurate an installation as we possibly can. And I think so far we're doing a reasonably good job of that.
I think one of the things, there are other artists who have done versions. This is by no means the first Goodnight Moon room in the world. But, as Emilie was saying before, we were thinking that we would, have other people, making some things. In addition, that obviously hasn't happened. But in addition to this being, as far as we know, this is the only knitted version of, it's basically page 9 and 10. If you want to open your books to page 9 and 10, it's the only knitted version of that, but it's also going to end up being the only version that I think that we've seen that did not include found objects.
Yes.
In our attempts to be as accurate as possible, like we've designed and are building this rocking chair. And we bought a
Ken
rocking
is building
chair.
this rocking chair, to be clear. Emilie doesn't build anything.
We looked for rocking chairs that we could use, and that rocking chair that we did find has been cut apart and is laying on a pile of trash out by the shop because it just wasn't right. So one of the things that I appreciate, and I think this is a byproduct of how Emilie works, is she's so meticulous. I watched her spend 2 days working on a cat. And these are just the last 2 days that she worked on a cat. But like the detail that, it's excruciating sometimes to watch the lengths that she will go to be as accurate as she possibly can, which I really appreciate watching because it makes me trust her work more, knowing that, just the lengths that she will go to in order to make things right. So, yeah, I think this is probably the largest fiber. The idea is to present this work in a novel, interesting, and relatable way. The story is relatable and fiber itself is incredibly relatable. We wanted to do something novel, something, as close to innovative as possible, and, at unprecedented scale. So hopefully we stick the landing on all three of those things.
And Emilie, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just going to say that, speaking of, you mentioned that I seem to be a visual person or having vision, and to whatever degree that is true, who knows? But I will say that I think Ken is highly visionary, because from the first day that we started talking about this, he said, I envision school buses lining the street outside of this installation, which, to be perfectly honest, is something that would never have occurred to me. I tend to get very laser focused on what I'm doing. And he had this vision of school field trips coming to see this show. And I thought, well, that does make a whole lot of sense. I would have loved coming to see this show as a kid. And man, has he worked his butt off to make that a reality. And I don't know what the number is now. Over 700, I think, students from around the area, some of whom are traveling 50, 60 miles to get there, have signed up for a field trip to come see this installation and do a fiber workshop with us and having story time and all of that. But like he envisioned that 2 years ago, and all of a sudden in these last few months, it has come to fruition, and we've got 3 solid weeks of just school bus after school bus after school bus coming to see this show.
Yeah, talk about the programming that you're putting around this and what you're trying to facilitate, not only with this installation and the exhibition of it, but what you're really trying to do and to say with this whole thing.
Yeah, I will speak very briefly on it and hand it over to Ken because this is really his baby. You know, one of the things that we've spoken about in terms of the way that we are designing this art is to be a lightning rod, to shine light on something greater than itself. You know, one of the things that actually, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ken because this is really his thing. I'm going to hand it over to Ken.
I was hoping for a little bit more prep time.
Oh, sorry, honey.
So, we'll start with the programming side. I just had this moment of, on the spectacle side, what it would look like and what it might mean to have school buses lining the street. And, the original image, was a long line of school buses. As it turns out, we're going to have, I think we're at 17 different groups of kids will be coming. So maybe we'll have, I think our largest group is 79 students and, maybe 15 chaperones with that group. So we won't have a whole street lined, but, we'll have a couple of bus parking spots blocked off 17 times, which is pretty cool in and of itself. I think our total, we got around 700 students. And if we, add all of their adults, we're probably going to top 850 people will visit this exhibition as part of a field trip, which the feedback that we've gotten, from educators and people in the community, that this is, unprecedented for the region. And we've got students coming from, the town of Branson, population 59, from Raton, Levita, Honey. I mean, they're just coming from all over the place, which is really gratifying. And on the programming side for them, we're trying to figure out what do we, you can't just walk in this 20,000 square foot space, look at a 500 square foot version of a children's story and then turn around and go home. So we've added some programming. We're going to be doing story time. One of the things that's emerged as a part of this is, what impact can we have on not only the literacy rate, and we know we're not going to make a huge difference. Well, I guess we don't know what difference we'll make, but literacy rates in Southern Colorado are not great compared to the average in the state of Colorado. So hopefully we'll be able to help with that. But one of the ways that we hope to do that is to encourage parents to read to their kids, because research shows that makes a huge difference. So there'll be a story time component. I don't think that's going to be a great fit. I mean, we've got our youngest student who's coming is 1, and our oldest is 17. So, it's a challenge. What do you do? What kind of programming can you create that will appeal to such a broad range of age groups? So we're going to do story time. And we're going to do, initially we were going to do a fiber diorama. We were envisioning lots of shoe boxes, and, the students being able to recreate a version of the exhibition at the table. But we flattened that out to a piece of cardboard. So it's going to be a lot of yarn, glue, rounded scissors, probably a lot of noise and a lot of mess. And when we heard that the preschoolers were coming, we added crayons to the mix. So they'll be drawing, they'll be making a mess with glue and yarn, which we've not quite figured out how we're going to keep that from being an ungodly mess. It probably will be to some extent. So that's what the programming looks like for students. More broadly speaking, one of the beautiful things about this story and the longevity of this story is that it has, as Emilie alluded to earlier, it has touched the lives of people in multiple generations across the spectrum of age. And one of the things that we've stumbled upon quite happily as a result of creating the soundtrack is just how meaningful the story has been in the lives of people who have left these recordings, because they've left other messages. I used to read this to my daughter. We've had people read it to their children. We've had people read it with their children. A friend of mine who was kind enough to leave a recording. We've had people thank us for inviting them to be a part of this project. Like I was going to say, a friend of mine whose daughter passed last year sent a message thanking us for including her in this project, because she used to read this story to her daughter when she was young. And just in leaving the recording, felt like she was with her. These were, this wasn't part of the plan. This is one of the ways this project has taken on a life of its own and has sort of revealed to us the ways in which, the project is meaningful to people in ways that you won't see when you come to the show. The way it ties into, something bigger than itself, as a result of my, design work. When I was doing work in the field of long-term care, is I really caught, I did a lot of research, for that project. And, the world is aging. We have an aging population, and it's a complex reality. We have people who are living longer, and younger people are having fewer kids. So it is a global phenomenon that, countries and states and municipalities are aging at different rates. And the state of Colorado, by aging, the way that's being measured is the number of people over 60 compared to the number of people under 18. And so the first time in recorded history, and this is happening at different rates around the world, and here in the state of Colorado, we'll hit this benchmark in this year in 2023. But for the first time, we have more people over 60 than under 18. And you can imagine that all of the systems, services that have been designed in a world and for a world when there were more younger people than there are older people. And so if you imagine that as an iceberg, the iceberg is flipping. And, whether it's transportation or housing or work or, Social Security would be a good example of this, where there are not enough people paying into it in order to cover the costs of the people who are, benefiting from it right now. So, there's a global initiative, and, it's, built around this idea of age-friendly communities. So there are countries that have signed on. There are states. The state of Colorado was the third state in the United States to sign on to becoming an age-friendly state. And there are, 30 or so municipalities in the state of Colorado who are also age-friendly communities. So one of the things that, we're wanting to do with this work is to, well, one, we want to be a resource for rural and frontier communities who they themselves reached this benchmark years ago, but are faced with addressing the challenges that are the result of their own aging population. And this, this Goodnight Moon project fits really nicely in that one, it appeals to people across the spectrum of age, and bringing youngers and olders together is one of the domains of livability, which is the framework that age-friendly communities sort of builds around. So this Goodnight Moon project is part of the design of that, is to create an opportunity where people of all ages can come together and interact with one another around something that they all appreciate already, to be a lightning rod for the state of Colorado's policy response to an aging population, which is called Lifelong Colorado. So Lifelong Colorado is a vision for the state, and there is just a ton of work being done right now across the state on what kind of policies, what are the solutions that as a community we can come up with that will help create communities where people of all ages thrive. And so this is, Goodnight Moon happening down in southern Colorado, which is older than the state on average and under-resourced in comparison to the state. And so it was important for us to launch Goodnight Moon in southern Colorado so that the people in southern Colorado get it first before it travels, but also to help draw attention to the work that's being done down here in terms of becoming age friendly, generally speaking.
And then circling back to the whole literacy thing, and I've heard this numerous times that, my sister being an educator, how important it is that, parents read to their children when they're young, or be read by somebody, whether it's grandparents, aunts, uncles, or what have you. Do you have the literacy rates for Southern Colorado compared to the either national average or the state average?
State of Colorado's at 47. Los Animas and Huerfano County are in their 20s. I have it written down but not memorized. But they're lagging
lower.
behind. What's that?
Just that that locally it is significantly lower than it is statewide.
Yeah.
So basically, they're saying less than a third of the people in the southern Colorado is literate.
Well, what they're saying, one of the third grade is a pivotal point in terms of literacy. So what those numbers reflect is that students are not reading at grade level. And, as you were saying, Todd, the impact of being behind, it's hard to catch up. And so because it's hard to catch up and it impacts so many areas of life and learning, it's like when I was a kid and I was in chemistry class, right? First couple weeks, I thought chemistry was going to be really cool, but because I was really no good at algebra, I didn't speak the language that you needed to speak in order to be good at chemistry, right? So I slowly moved my way to the back of the room and out of the class, and goodness knows where I went, right? If you think about that dynamic playing out around reading, right, which impacts many more areas of your life than algebra. Imagine that you don't feel good about your ability to read, and thus you don't feel good about yourself, and you're losing confidence. And the easiest thing to do is remove yourself from the uncomfortable situation. If you don't have people in your life that are doing the things that support you to push through that, then opportunities over the course of your lifetime are greatly diminished. So that's why reading is an important thing to get right early.
And Emilie touched on the whole facet of these recordings. Talk about how, and are people still able to call in and record at this point, or is that kind of a done deal? But talk about how you're facilitating all this.
Yeah, so this element started, one of the things that we were wanting to do was be as inclusive as possible and invite as many people as possible to participate. And so, one of the things in Southern Colorado is there are, people, who are living here today whose families predate, colonialism. And we wanted to honor, like, here we have this beautiful children's story. How do we honor the languages that have been spoken by the people who have called this region home over time? And so we were able to, with the help of, a couple of people down here and the library, identify 38 languages that historically have been spoken in this region. Now, none of those languages on that, these were census data and mining accidents and stuff like that. But none of the languages spoken by Indigenous people from the First Nations were included on that list. And so we started out like, who's still here? Who are the descendants of the people who spoke those languages, who still speak those languages, so that they could record themselves reading Goodnight Moon in the languages spoken by their ancestors as a part of this soundtrack. Well, the people who are still here don't speak those languages anymore. So we didn't want to let go of the idea of what does it sound like to have this story spoken in languages other than English. And so while we have a lot of people locally who have left recordings in English and, some, Dutch or Spanish or Italian, we just weren't able to hit the 38 languages with people who live here. So we opened it up to the entire world. And so now we have, it's been read in Ukrainian and Korean and Japanese and Chinese, and I mean, so many different languages. People from Germany, all over the world, people have called and left us recordings. And we've got 100 plus recordings in all. And as Emilie said, we're around 40 languages other than English. And I think that we will be, somebody called yesterday. So we're going to continue taking these recordings, because our original, or maybe our second thought was, how do we tell this story in such a way that children who, maybe this story hasn't been translated into their language yet, could hear it both in the language that they speak and in a different voice every day for a year, which was an arbitrary number. And part of what we hope to accomplish with that is, if we both, let's say we're both Ohio State Buckeye fans, all right? And you live in one place and I live in the other, but we agree that we're both Buckeye fans, that I no longer see you as other, all right? And if there's a way in which, through the telling of this story in as many languages as possible, that a 7-year-old today can hear, a 7-year-old here in the United States today could hear this story in Korean, that they would go, oh, it's kind of like when I was in the Navy and you look across the water and you see a sailor on a ship and you realize they're not that much different than you. That if we can, and I don't know if this will happen, I don't know if we'll ever know if it does or does not happen, but the aim is to help dismantle the idea of other through the telling of this story in languages and voices that are unfamiliar to the listener. Time will tell.
So how can people still participate if they want to read the story and record it for you?
Yeah, so we set up a Google number. So you can call 719-297-1177 and just leave a recording of yourself on that voicemail. It takes, on average, 1 minute and 48 seconds to do it. Or you can record it on your smart device if you're out of the United States, and, you can send it to us, as a message through social media. You can find us on Instagram at wove.world. Between that number and, Instagram messages, you'll get it to us. The idea is that this just continues.
And where in Trinidad is this going to be at? What is the space that you're creating this all in?
Yeah, so we are at the Commons at Space to Create, which is 218 West Main Street, right in downtown Trinidad. It's part of the Core Zone de Trinidad Creative District, and part of the Art Space building, which was one of the first art space live work artist affordable
The
housing.
first, maybe.
I think it was the first, in the state of Colorado.
Yeah.
There are a number of them now, but this was really the brainchild of the woman who was spearheading the initiative to have Trinidad certified as a creative district. So this is the flagship space, which was the flagship project as a part of the birth of the creative district here in Trinidad.
And so do these folks give you a space to do this in, or do you have to rent this space in order to build this and put together all this programming and everything else that's going along with it?
Well, you can rent space, but I think they're so happy that we're doing this that they've made the space available to us. Frog was here for the opening of this space, and
he's still in the space.
Yeah, he's still there. Frog is still it's a 20,000 square foot former auto garage. I think the ceilings are probably 30 feet, but Frog is in there now, and we'll be moving him sometime the next couple of days. And they have generously doing everything that they can to make this easy to happen here first. So they've been a great partner. Hands down, they've been a great partner. And they're like, yeah, whatever you guys want to do it. We're not worried about you at all.
How long is the exhibit up for?
Well, it was originally scheduled to be open 1 month, and they extended it. So now we are May 5th to July 7th. And it's likely that it'll go for a third month through August. And, the show itself is designed to travel. And, once we have images to add to our exhibition packet, to go to the list of people up and down I-25 that have a space that's suitable, we'll know where it's going to go next. But, if it stays up here for 3 months, we'd be happy to not have to take it down.
And this started out. Oh, go ahead, Ken.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, I was going to circle back to a conversation that we had previous. And this kind of came out of a little bit of a existential crisis that you're kind of experiencing. Is that correct, Emilie?
Yeah, most definitely. When I left Los Angeles, I thought that I was really prepared to leave my business, leave my family and friends, and sort of start this new life. I even was quite confident that even if this was incredibly challenging, that's okay too. I mean, I had a very zen feeling about how this was all going to go down. And, one of the beauties of having my shop in Los Angeles was that it provided me like a platform and a stage really to do my work. And it acted in many ways as, if you've ever seen the Disney movie Dumbo, the elephant has a feather. And he's told it's a magical feather, and that's what allows him to fly. And in many ways, my shop art string acted as that feather for me, and it allowed me to fly. And I needed it. I really needed it in order to take up the space that I required to take up. And I knew it was a feather on some level. And I knew that if I dropped the feather, I could keep flying. But I sure didn't. I sure didn't keep flying after I dropped that feather. And it really threw me. It surprised me how much I had been relying on that feather. And when I came to Colorado and I was away from family and I was away from friends and I was away from my business, I didn't fully appreciate how much I had wrapped up my identity in all of those things, particularly my business. And without it, I felt completely lost. And I didn't realize it fully at the time while I was going through it. But in retrospect, it's clear to me that I was having some version of an identity crisis. I did not know who I was. And I did not think that I had any value any longer, sadly. And it took me many years of just slogging through. There were some real challenges that came up in those first 2 years beyond the identity crisis. And you add the identity crisis to it. And I just really didn't know who or where I was and whether or not I would ever figure that out again. And I was so fortunate to have had such passion for what I was doing before. But it was frightening because I thought I'm never going to find anything to feel that way about again, because I didn't want to go back and I didn't want to recreate what I had created there, but I had no idea what to replace it with. And I had come to the conclusion that I never would. And I had come to the very sad conclusion that I would likely never feel real passion for anything ever again. I was really, in some ways, it sounds awfully dire when I think of it, and it's not like every day was horrific, but overall, I had resigned myself to a slow demise, really. I was just preparing to live the rest of my life very quietly until I died, which sounds really dramatic now. But I think that that's what was going on. And I got to a point a couple of years ago where there was some version of fire in me telling me, you can't let this happen. You can't just dwindle away. You have to figure something out. And, one of the things that Ken says all the time, and I don't know where it comes from, but is the only way out is through. And a friend of mine, when I was telling her about how I was feeling, said, what you really need is a walkabout. You need to give yourself a couple of weeks where you're not paying attention to anything and you don't have any shoulds and you don't have any responsibilities and you're just sitting in your stuff. And I decided that's a brilliant idea. I don't know what's going to come out of it, but I'm going to give it to myself. And I said to Ken one day, hey, I'm going to take the next 2 weeks and I'm just basically going to sit in my shit. And I don't know if 2 weeks is going to do it. I'm terrified that if I let myself sit in it, I might never come out because I've been trying to avoid it for years. But I'm going to sit in it and I'm going to see what comes of it. And I'm so sorry in advance. I am not going to clean myself up for you. If you walk into the room and I've been crying, I'm just going to sit there and keep crying. And if I have nothing to say, I'm not going to come up with something to say. I'm just going to say nothing. And it's going to be excruciating for both of us. And I'm so sorry, but I'm doing it. And it was really the first time that I had, number one, fully owned the fact that I was in a really rough place. And number two, decided that I was worth sort of running after myself to try to pull myself out of that there was value in me on the other side of it. And so that's what I did. I did a lot of sitting. I did a lot of staring. I did a lot of crying. I did a lot of walking around our land. And I was really hoping for some great epiphanies, which never came, frustratingly. I had no light bulb moment of, aha, this is what I need to do, or this is what I've been going through. Nothing of that sort. But allowing myself that time to just sit in it and not try to do anything about it, I think sent me the message that I was worth something. And about a week and a half into this fairly excruciating process, I looked at Ken and I said, I haven't had any epiphanies. I have no idea what's going to come after this. I have no idea why this is true, but I'm starting slowly to feel just a little bit better. And during that time, Ken had really been diving deep into this Lifelong Colorado and age-friendly communities work that he's continuing to do. And I quite honestly wanted nothing to do with it because it wasn't mine. And I had finally realized I don't want to work on somebody else's stuff. I want to figure out what I want to do. And I had announced to him, like, hey, babe, don't come to me with, hey, can you clean up this email that I'm crafting? Don't come to me with, hey, I'm creating a graphic. Can you add something to it? And I felt horribly guilty for making these statements to him, but I had decided, like, I can't. I don't have the bandwidth. Like, if I keep focusing on things that are not mine, I'm never going to come up with what is mine. And so he was diving deep into all of this work, and he was seeking some funding for a project that he wanted to do. And the funders he was speaking to said, this is wonderful. All of the work that you're doing is great. It's totally in alignment with this funding opportunity, but you need to be attached to an artist. And he said, he turned to me and he said, hey, you're an artist. I'm doing this work that requires me to be working with an artist. I know you said you don't want to be involved in my work. I want to be sensitive to that, but I also want to own that I love working with you. I love when we collaborate together. So if there were a way to do that, and if you could take me out of consideration altogether, don't consider what I would like to do, what I've done in the past, what you think I might be interested in. If you could just decide all on your own what it is that you want to do that I would then hop on board with, what would that be? And almost aggressively, because I thought it, number one, ludicrous idea to do this. Number two, there's no way that somebody is going to jump on board with me for this ludicrous idea. So I almost aggressively spat out at him, I would knit Goodnight Moon, fully expecting him to say, well, that's a ludicrous idea, because it is. And instead, without hesitation, he said, okay, great, let's do it. And there was a funding opportunity. The deadline for submitting a proposal was 2 weeks away. I did a little bit of research and saw that you really should allot 4 months to write a grant proposal for all of the rewrites and rethinking of the ideas and all of that. Neither of us had ever written a grant proposal before. We had 2 weeks to do it, and we said, fuck it, let's just do it. So we spent the next 2 weeks researching how on earth to write a grant proposal, coming up with the project, coming up with the programming, coming up with how it all aligned with Lifelong Colorado, writing and rewriting this proposal. And during the course of those 2 weeks, I remember having some version of an epiphany finally, which was, you know what? It doesn't even matter if we get this funding. As much as I want to do this project and as much as that would be great, it doesn't even matter, because in the exploration of possibly doing this, I could feel myself coming back to life. And it's something that was fully unexpected and something I obviously didn't think was going to happen as quickly as it did. But it started to happen just in the writing of this proposal. And the moment that I thought to myself, it doesn't matter whether or not we get this because I feel myself coming back to life, was also the moment I knew we were going to get it. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that we were going to get this funding. And we submitted our proposal, I believe, at about 11:52 for a midnight deadline. And then we waited many months. And it was the night before we were leaving my family in California, actually, for our, I don't know, we were there for Thanksgiving or Christmas or something. And the night before we were about to leave, I opened up my email and, there it was, you've been accepted and you've been funded at, 90+% of your request on your first shot. And that was a really magical moment that then led to us speaking with our funders, who said, hey, while you're at it, there's this other opportunity, and I think you should go after that too. So we went after that and submitted another proposal, and we got that, and that had a much quicker turnaround time. And so Frog happened as a result of that. At some point during that process of looking for venues for Frog, we met a gallerist who didn't end up hosting Frog, but said, hey, I have a show next week, a True West show. Do you happen to have anything on hand that would fit into a Western theme? And we said, no, but we'll get you something. And 2 days later, we had a giant 6-foot diameter crocheted hat, which we called Tom Mix Wept, in honor of the famous cowboy film star, Tom Mix, who was good friends with Wyatt Earp and was so touched at his funeral that he actually wept. They were the final lines, I believe, of the movie Tombstone, and Tom Mix wept. So, from that one question that Ken posed to me, and thank goodness he posed it to me in the way that he did and asked me to not consider him at all, which is what made room for me to be really truthful in my response of what it was that I really wanted to do. A series of events just unfolded, one right after another. And now here we are, nearly more than 2 years later, I guess, just about 2 years later, finally ready to hopefully stick the landing on Goodnight Moon, which is where it all started. So
it's a great story.
I agree. I'm grateful for it.
So I know you're in the thick of it right now, and you're just trying to get it done for this opening that you have on May 5th. But what is the vision for this? And can you kind of touched about it moving, past here as far as showing it up and down the I-25 corridor? Mm-hmm. What is kind of the vision for the future of this Goodnight Moon?
Well, this is a prototype. I look at life, like everything that we're doing right now is a prototype for whatever comes next. Tom Mix was a prototype for Frog. Frog's a prototype for Goodnight Moon. Our projects, keep getting bigger and hopefully more meaningful. Emilie was saying Tom Mix points to the relationship between, every boy grew up wanting to be Tom Mix, rough and tough cowboy, but yet he openly wept at his friend's funeral. Frog, at a glance, you look at Frog and it's, this this giant frog that sits in the iconic red and blue chair. But that frog, in knitting, frogging is, you drop a stitch, you make a mistake, you tear your work apart, and that's frogging. And so frog is knitting a future version of himself. And, the meaning of, around Goodnight Moon, we've sort of explored that sufficiently, I think. And it being, tied to, and when I say tied to, we are aligned with Lifelong. They're not our sponsors. We are big fans of a concerted effort to create a world where young and old alike, find a place for themselves with each other. And so, the programming is a prototype. The exhibition is a prototype. We'll see what we learn from, May through July in terms of, the programming that works on the younger side of things. There are some programming that we're going to experiment with, engaging, older folks. What does it mean? And we're going to, take design and we're going to apply it to the challenge of designing a life and see what it is that we learn from, those experiences, and then put our best foot forward on the programming side and offer, one of the things about Lifelong Colorado and the traction that it's gained so far is that, there are communities, in Colorado that are already designated as age friendly. Walsenburg, we got them designated down here in southern Colorado. Colorado Springs has probably one of the most successful age-friendly communities initiative in the country. There's a lot of activity in Denver. Boulder's got it going on. Fort Collins has it going on. So we're looking at reaching out to the people who I have relationships with who are doing age-friendly work in these communities already. And we'll, throw Goodnight Moon and the programming, up against the wall first in these communities that are already engaged in age-friendly work. See what we can do to create a place, both for the exhibition and for the programming in those communities that are already moving forward with this work. And if there's a way to, bring other communities on board that are not committed to doing this work, then, if we can bring more people into the conversation, we'll do that. But, first thing we're going to go, where the resistance is least and see if this is something that resonates with the communities that are already working to become age friendly.
Excellent. It's been an honor to talk with you both. I look forward to see you both in person here in a couple of weeks for the opening of Goodnight Moon.
We're excited you're coming down.
Yeah, very.
And I thank you guys so much for spending the time that you did with us this afternoon or morning and this afternoon. And I wish you the best in the coming week and a half, 2 weeks, whatever it is at this juncture to get all this squared away and done. And I just think it's phenomenal. So thank you very much for the work that you guys do.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having us. This was a lot of fun.
And thank you for doing your podcast, because it really has been the background to a number of days.
Yes.
It's nice to hear, it's nice to hear the work that other people are doing. And it's nice to get to know the two of you, as you, interview, other artists around. So appreciate you doing that too.
Well, I'm going to go hunt Goodnight Moon. I'm going to go find that book and read it. And
Nice.
Okay.
then I'm going to send it to my daughter to read to our granddaughter.
Awesome.
I'm excited to see how this all unfolds, and super excited to see what comes later, because everything has been an interesting step from Tom Mix weeps to the frog to this, and it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in the future with you guys. You guys are doing cool stuff. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Whimsy and joy. Like,
yes.
If it isn't fun, we're not going to do it.
That's right. Yep. That's the best attitude to have.
Yeah.
So Emilie, I'm going to ask one more thing and ask if you might indulge me by reading Goodnight Moon before we sign off.
Well, one would think that I would have it memorized, but surprise, surprise, I do have a copy right here because I am referring to it all day, every day as reference for this knitting. So I will happily indulge you. Oh, thank you, Henry. He's coming to listen. All right. Goodnight Moon by Margaret Wise Brown. Pictures by Clement Hurd. In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of the cow jumping over the moon. And there were 3 little bears sitting on chairs and 2 little kittens and a pair of mittens and a little toy house and a young mouse, and a comb and a brush and a bowl full of mush, and a quiet old lady who was whispering, hush. Good night, room. Good night, moon. Good night, cow jumping over the moon. Good night, light and the red balloon. Good night, bears. Good night, chairs. Good night, kittens. And good night, mittens. Good night, clocks. And good night, socks. Good night, little house. And good night, mouse. Good night, comb. And good night, brush. Good night, nobody. Good night, mush. And good night to the old lady whispering, hush. Good night, stars. Good night, air. Good night, noises everywhere. The end.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Be sure to follow Emilie and Ken on their Instagram at wove.world. And if you happen to be in the Trinidad area, maybe you're looking for something fun to do with your family, you want to do a little day trip or a weekend getaway, and want to see what's shaking down in southern Colorado, catch Goodnight Moon, a fiber tale at Space to Create in Trinidad. The opening reception is May 5th from 5 to 8 p.m., and it's on view Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., through the 7th of July. As usual, I will have all this and more in this week's episode notes. For the Tenant Podcast, I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.